Zoom to the unmoving human who's up in the front with the tube pumping fumes to him straight from the back of the Camry. Ashamed he just could not provide for himself, let alone for his family. It's a blue pill mindset that spent 2020 making dance beats.
I think I liked it better being blind, when I couldn't read between the lines, and when I couldn't see the cracks in the structure that lay bare before me the whole time. I think I liked it better back when I suspended disbelief and swallowed pride, and thought I knew the difference in the red from the blue, but they both bleed us so dry. They both bleed us so dry.
Ignorance is bliss, which explains why a lot of us are so fucking happy. Quick to take the trip for all its trappings. Never one to ask what's up, what's going on, or God forbid what's happening. A lot of us would strap into the ride and then spit right in the eye of the guy whose job it is to snap your fastenings. But maybe we're all born with that capacity. Maybe each of us comes standard with humor, compassion, malice, and audacity. Some of us are blind to the system, but some see it fine and say this is how it has to be. Some of us can stare wide-eyed at a nationwide human catastrophe and only offer platitudes and recipes. And I wish that I could tell myself that nothing's worth obsessing past my everyday necessities. I wish that I could cry fake news over anything that threatened me, tune out our abuses and consume a little levity. Wish that I could offer up my son a smoother destiny. Wish I had some better lessons for how best to answer questions for the things I've been perpetually questioning. But I'm too busy looking at our leaders, wondering what I might be missing from their messaging. Trying to find the reasoning to let 250,000 people meet an early reckoning. And even though I know the truth, it's hard to swallow something that's so literally sickening. Hope is ever dwindling, COVID ever beckoning. Winter slows your breathing, but your pulse is ever quickening. Even though I know the truth, it's hard to keep listening. I'm done with my epiphany, my innocence is blistering. I'd like to think I'd taste the earth before I'd ever kiss the ring. Hard to speak the truth and harder still to keep listening.
Sometimes I think I miss being blind, when I couldn't read between the lines, and when I couldn't see the cracks in the structure that lay bare before me the whole time. I think I liked it better back when I suspended disbelief and swallowed pride. Thought I knew the difference in the red from the blue, but they both bleed us so dry. Both bleed us so dry. Both bleed us so dry. They both bleed us so dry.
Legend says that Hercules swept Cerberus right off his feet and effortlessly set him down softly as a songbird. Atlas kept the world upon his back, and every day wondered whether he could stand it any longer. And Tara Reade came out to say the man they tried to label the messiah of morality was really just another rapist. And I don't intend to hesitate when asked who was the stronger. Tara, like Assange, knew that carrying the truth would be the hardest labor. Tara knew that her assailant wasn't gonna make us any safer, and knew he's just the type of man to hand a decent foreign leader US printed walking papers, and knew he'd be relentless and aggressive in the war he'd wage upon her very character, that his attempts to weaken and degrade and embarrass her would be her only compensation. But I strongly doubt that anyone could ever have foreseen the stream of hate that came from quote-unquote progressives and the self-styled titans of survivor advocation. So if you really think there's something to be gained out of sharing your pain with the world, you are sorely mistaken. The Biden team just dragged their feet addressing Tara's allegations. Until they had a decent list of smears, then they aired them out on every station. And it turns out no one wants to hear the truth of who they praised as being worthy of such bloated liberal celebration. That no one wants to really know the person they've so valiantly defended, even when it meant they had to gloat and shit all over someone braver than they'd be if given the occasion. Now cue the faceless comment squad invasion. Cue those fuckers crawling out the woodwork to come analyze the way you wore your hair and what you wear. Like your appearance waives your rights, or that somehow you're the reason for your situation. Somehow they've decided you should bear responsibility for what such monstrous men insist on doing. Somehow they're deluded by the empty, hypocritical, and useless fucking platitudes that bastard keeps on spewing. And I think it's very telling that the best of their excuses when they try to come and justify our president's abuses is a hearty butt Trump. In which case I'll remind you that you never saw the news attempt to sell us Donald Trump like he was morally upstanding or a decent human. But when Joe says something bigoted or ogles someone's little kid, CNN says, "Isn't this refreshing? Biden's like a mix of JFK and FDR with all the finer parts of Harry Truman." Christ, I know that they don't think that we're the brightest, but at least pretend we got a couple lumens. Ask yourself if you have ever questioned what they fed you, or do you just shut your eyes and then consume it? And now ask yourself if you ate every one of Biden's lies under guise of harm reduction and the promise of a slight improvement. And now imagine long ago that Biden chose to show you who he really was by traumatizing you for his amusement. Now imagine that you watched him touch a Bible with those filthy hands, and then assume the power of the highest seat in all the land, of knowing your attacker wields a global coalition born of three-letter agencies who'll make a life's mission out of trying to discredit you through lies, damn lies, and collusion. Big tech is never gonna separate from our surveillance state. Fuck's sakes, they're just a breath away from total fusion. So there will come a time where even if you see the light, your voice will never reach the sky through all the bots and all the noise pollution. So trust us when we tell you that the masking of abuses is perhaps this country's oldest institution. And I know nothing nobler than facing it in honor of the truth when you know that the people holding power have been neutralizing truth since there was wet ink on the Constitution. So know that Tara's truth is something crucial to the movement. And if you see yourself a partner to the revolution, help this country see through all the baseless propaganda through the crux of Joe's illusions, and recognize that Tara Reade gave everything she had so she could tell us what the truth is. Recognize the decent thing to do when someone bears their soul and shows their bruises is not to ask for context or offer up your own solutions. Your job is just to listen with an honest mind and put yourself on Tara's side a moment so you understand the path she chooses. That there is no instant fame worth the dragging of your name. And if that's what you think, you've a lot to learn about the kind of facts the mob can handle and the kind that it refuses. You've a lot to learn about the news and all its many uses. Guess you've yet to learn the truth the news will serve as fruit from which they've squeezed out all the juices. And we all eat the husk and just pretend it's full of nutrients and isn't really useless. But the jaws of our ability to yield accountability are absolutely toothless. So don't you kid yourself that any lips are being loosened. They won't ever tell us where the bodies are or show us where the proof is. It's on you to recognize the lechery our president so regularly oozes. It's on you to muster up some honesty and ask yourself how Biden won your trust, but it's America that loses. Open up your eyes and learn to recognize the bruises. Open up your eyes and learn to recognize the bruises. March of Dimes. Family fun run cancer bonanza. Front page of Apartheid Times. All of the charm of a car bomb. Arms wide open, taking no targets alive. Dark was the night, save for a red glow painting the sky in a sickening light. Like a scene out of hell or a day in an utterly alien life. When the fire runs wild. These are the years where the wild is more your daily drive. To wrestle the truth of extinction from out of the jaws of your pride. So open them wide, now is the time, there's nothing to fight. Blasted or sworn to defy, the end is the same and we're inches away from the line. So abandon your ego to die, the bed that we made is where we go to die. But never was passing in one's own sleep such a hideous sight. Such a storm of convulsion and vile expulsion from out of our mouths and our eyes. But these are the rights they implore us to exercise, with our signature forged and our hands all tied. And with eye contact and a senator's smile, they thank you for saving democracy right as they tighten the binds. Right when they're joining your chain to your neighbors, leading you out in a line. Call it the March of Dimes. One more charity parody. Hold back grants while we dance for the president's salary. Funding the bunkers where all of the wealthy will cower to witness our steepest decline. To err is a trait so inherently human. And to hoard enough wealth that you peacefully sleep when those humans are burning alive is truly divine. If divinity really means withered and fully decaying inside, you could live with yourself till you run out of wine and ring for a drone off a prime, skim a little off of the top of the March of Dimes. Sign of our system of capital, head to the sky with a hideous cry that mimics the suffering families out on the street that have built a career out of passing by, who were part of the great design, part of a citizen base with its fate resigned, part of a two-party system where both of the goals align, and the end result is more housing crisis than the plot device of 2009. Capitalism demanded a sacrifice, so I walk to the square, hand them my son, and they hand me the dice. I roll for his life. To an equal extent, you could say I was rolling for mine. I'd called any favor, I paid any bribe. But it's all up to me for the roll, so I close my eyes. And the sound of the crowd is the same for a 1 or a 5. Two equal outcomes playing as though they're on opposite sides.
Everyone, it's the Politics of Survival, and I'm your host, Tara Reade, and I am so happy to be here and excited to introduce a professor and author of many books. His name is Dan Kovalik, and thank you, Dan, for coming. And I just was raving to you about your latest book, so without further ado, here's Dan.
Thank you, Tara. Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you first off about your book, the latest one that I just read, and I think Reade has the cover. So if we could throw that up, that would be great.
Yes, ma'am.
And for everyone who's watching and listening, you can, if you're interested, you can find, like if you look down in the section, you'll see links to Dan's Twitter as well as his book. So The Plot to Scapegoat Russia, which the title alone says it all. So I'll let you kind of discuss that. So when did that come out, and where are we now?
Yeah, so that came out in 2017, and I wrote it mostly at that time in response to Russiagate, which was really hot at the time. And which is, I assume most people recall, was this claim that somehow the Russians interfered in the 2016 elections and got Trump elected, basically. Though there was never any evidence of that, of course.
Well, now it's been completely debunked. I mean, and, Hillary Clinton didn't go to Wisconsin. And I, as a little girl, I lived on a farm in Wisconsin. If you want to win, you got to go to Wisconsin.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
You're right. Exactly. There were things she did to lose the election, including calling her own working class base the deplorables.
Right.
If you say not going to Wisconsin, which is a working class and farmer state, very important swing state that she took for granted.
Yep.
There were a number of things that were happening. Her personal email server, which became an issue because James Comey, a few weeks before the election, put out a letter kind of strangely saying we're still investigating this issue. That hurt her. And they said, oh, and by the way, we found some of her emails on Anthony Weiner's computer. Like, none of these things helped her, right? But later, everyone forgets this, and James Comey then becomes the hero of the Clintonites, etc. Very strange, but so they claim Russia did it, and which to me seemed like the most infantile claim ever, and yet a lot of people bought it, right?
Well, and what's amazing is, and this is my opinion, but it just seems she has almost an obsessive animosity towards Vladimir Putin. And it's like, I know, like, Joe Biden has his, and they all do, like the whole administration. And as you know, I worked on the Hill, so I know about that. Now, I worked pre-Putin, so I was there in the 90s right after the fall of the Soviet Union. But I heard them talk about how that then the Soviet Union transitioning to Russia, how it would never have a seat at the table as far as they were concerned. They did not want it to become a world power. And you talked a lot about that in your book. So thank you.
Yeah, well, yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think, even when you listen or read Putin's recent speeches, he talks about that, how the Russians, once communism ended in the Soviet Union and the Soviet Union ended, they thought fully they'd be welcomed into the West, right? They thought that what was holding that back was communism,
right?
And they were shocked to find no, it was that they were Russian, right? I mean, they were never welcome back, and that's an incredible thing that people don't understand. I think
it's and you kind of get into a little bit of the historical place of this, but there's this snobbery in Europe where they almost always rejected Russia as part of Europe. Like, if you know what I mean, part of it is kind of considered, but kind of not. And yet, and so here we are, in this environment where we villainize this country, which I think, and you have made it quite clear too, the military industrial complex needs a convenient enemy that's big enough to seem vast enough to seem like an enemy, but not quite big enough to really do anything, against the US or European nations, and then, Vladimir Putin, to his credit, I mean, he really did put back the middle class. He built up Russia. He kicked out the people that were, robbing the trough, so to speak. And kind of whipped control of the oligarchs. Whereas like America, I think we're run by oligarchs. Like, and you use the Jimmy Carter quote in your book, I remember. Yeah. Yeah,
well, it's true. I mean, Stephen F. Cohen, one of the great, Russian experts and Sovietologists, God rest his soul, He said one of the things the West cannot forgive Putin for is getting the bear back on its feet, right? They were happy after the collapse of the Soviet Union when people were starving, right? When 2 million Russians died.
Right.
They were happy when, Boris Yeltsin, who was a drunk, was running the country, allowing it to be looted, including by American and Western oligarchs, right?
Right.
And to their chagrin, Putin comes along and he, makes Russia a power again. But I think the other thing they were upset about Putin. So first of all, let's remember that, George W. Bush at one point said, hey, Putin was his friend. He looked into his eyes, saw his soul. Yeah. Putin was the first world leader to call Bush after 9/11, offer condolences, offer to help in the war on terror. He did help in the war on terror. So, for a time, Putin was okay by the powers that be.
And then came 2007.
Well, even earlier.
2002,
2003, he would not go along with the war in Iraq.
Right. Oh, that's right.
Would not support a Security Council authorization for that. That was his first sin.
Okay.
That he would not go along with that war, right? And then there were other incidents like that as time goes on. But I think that's the first sin where Bush turns on Putin in Russia, where he was showing some independence.
So where do you feel like it really went sour? Like, because my marker was 2007, that speech he gave, which I thought was fantastic because it made really good points about moving to a multipolar rather than staying in a unipolar world. But what was your take on that? And was that a big marker, or is that just my interpretation?
I think that was one marker. I think there's been a few. Again, the Iraq War was one. That one was one. Certainly, for as far as the Russians were concerned and Putin were concerned, the war in Libya, that they thought, China and Russia had abstained from the Security Council authorization for a NATO no-fly zone and for NATO to protect civilians. And of course, it quickly turned into a regime change. And Putin was very upset by this. It was Medvedev who was president at the time. But apparently what I heard I think this was Stephen F. Cohen who said this, is that Putin watched that video of Gaddafi being murdered twice, very brutal video. And this led him to say, hey, I'm not going to let this happen again. Right. And then when Syria happened and the U.S. started trying to overthrow Assad, Putin, who is now president, decided, I'm not going to allow this to happen again.
Yeah.
And so he gets involved in Syria, and that was a grave sin as far as the U.S. was concerned. And he stopped that regime change. And then, of course, we had the Russiagate, which was all based on lies, but they were lies. One that, the ruling class was promoting to gin up hatred towards Russia, and which a lot of the Democratic base bought, and they still buy to this day. And it allows them to feel this insane hatred towards Russia. I mean, I see it on my Facebook account, friends. I have very liberal friends, some who teach acting, in college, the most liberal people you could ever meet. And they're like, one of them literally posted today that Americans who have assault rifles should be donating them to Ukraine. It's this is the liberal minded acting professor, but this is how Russiagate broke people's brains, right?
It did. You're right. Well, Trump.
The combination, right? The fact Trump was elected, no one thought he was going to be elected. I don't think Trump thought he was going to be elected. Were shocked. They needed an explanation. So they said Russia did it, right?
Right.
And they continue to take that, stance, which is crazy, but that's what helped bring us to where we are right now.
Well, and frankly, right. I think it was today I saw something on Sussman, you have Hillary, not only was it not true, but they were criminal in their actions. And the FBI had an office. Is that right? In Hillary Clinton's campaign room. And like a lot of nefarious activities that actually they were accusing Russia of, they were actually doing themselves. They were manufacturing false narratives and using government agencies to do it. It's stunning and it's frightening.
Well, that's what we do, right? So we claimed Russia interfered in the 2016 elections, which they did not. Mm-hmm. But that's merely projecting what we do to every other country, right? Including Russia, so there's the famous Time magazine article that highlighted the Clintons' interference in the 1996 elections in Russia, right? Where Boris Yeltsin had a 3% approval rating, and Bill Clinton sent his team in to rescue him. In fact, I think that's the title of the Time cover story, I think it says U.S. to the rescue or Clinton to the rescue, and that's it. And they bailed Yeltsin out. And of course,
it was 12 billion. Was it 12 billion they gave to the election?
Yeah, some of that money went just straight for vote buying, but all sorts of other things. They gave major IMF loan that helped floated the economy, which helped Yeltsin at the time.
Right.
So it was major interference, as we do in so many other countries, but we project that on others, right? We do that, but we don't want to admit that. So we say, oh, that's what the Russians do. Or the case, Russia invades Ukraine, and we say, oh, this is the first war in Europe since World War II. Well, no, because NATO bombed Serbia in 1999 for 79 days.
Yep.
And that had no Security Council authorization. Russia would never agree to that. And yet we pretend that didn't happen. No, it's Russia that invades other countries. So let's not talk about that. We invaded Iraq twice, and Afghanistan, and Libya, and Serbia, and now in Somalia. We just sent troops to Somalia. But don't look at that. Don't look at the fact we're supporting Saudi Arabia in a genocidal war in Yemen. That's not to be discussed.
1 million children are at risk of dying, and millions of people may die from this conflict, and it's not worthy of discussing in the mainstream media. I mean, this is the psychological gymnastics that the U.S. government and the American people do, frankly, to justify their crimes is incredible. And the corporate media is complicit. I mean, they're complicit. And I don't know if you're familiar with me coming forward, but when I came forward in 2019, the first thing that happened was that Edward Isaac Dovere of The Atlantic wrote a hit piece about me before. Now you have to understand, the article hadn't even been printed yet. It was on like the AP wire. Within hours, he was online calling me a Russian asset. And then throwing up all these things because I said good, positive things about Russia. Well, and it was used to try to discredit me. And one of the first questions from the New York Times was if I had an online Russian boyfriend. They were just totally focused because, of course, I couldn't have any independent thoughts. I had to have a man telling me what to think, right?
Right. And again, and even if you had an online Russian boyfriend, you're allowed to have one. Many of us have all kinds of connections to all kinds of people. And
relate relatives or whatever. That are Russian. I mean, what right did they have to do that? But because this is what happened. Apparently the New York Times went to Joe Biden's campaign and said, this person is a former staffer and said this happened. And there's a harassment report. There's these, contemporaneous evidence, and they just faxed back my articles about Russia being positive and implied that I was a Russian asset, and that was it.
And
the way we went.
The two are related, right?
Right.
I mean, it's like, but of course they were blaming Russia for everything, right? Kaepernick's, when he kneeled, they said that was Putin, and the Black Lives Matter, that was Putin, and the truckers in Canada, that was Putin. I mean,
baby formula, not having enough baby formula in the US, that's Vladimir Putin's fault. Well, I mean, and this is the thing. I don't know. It doesn't matter who would be president of Russia, right? they would be attacking that person in a personal way like they are. And I'm sorry, Reef, were you trying to say something? Did I interrupt? Oh, okay. I apologize. So my point is with this is I just use my personal example is that the whole excuse for anything going awry or going off, the talking points for the empire is that it's Russia's fault or specifically Vladimir Putin's fault. So when it comes to the regime change in my lifetime, I have never seen such rhetoric so violent towards a leader other than, I guess, Gaddafi, from our country. I mean, what is your thought on that?
No, I think I think it certainly rises to one of the highest levels I've ever seen. I do think Gaddafi was up there. I mean, ever since, I'm 54, I'll be 54 years old in a couple weeks. 54 years old, and since I was a child, Gaddafi was always painted as this evil monster. So he was always big. Of course, the leaders in North Korea, but Putin's certainly up there, and Putin certainly, I think, is the most vilified Russian leader, probably since Stalin.
Yeah.
And Stalin wasn't really vilified until he died, right? I mean, because he was Uncle Joe. He helped with, he didn't just help. We helped him kind of defeat the Nazis. I mean, the Soviet Union really did defeat the Nazis with a little help from his friends, right?
At the great loss of 27 million people. Yeah.
Right.
And
now we claim we won the war. I mean, again, it's disgusting.
Yeah.
But, is again, Stephen F. Cohen used to say, I mean, you can find pictures of John F. Kennedy hugging Khrushchev, right?
Right.
Nixon, of course, went to China, met with Mao, and he met with Brezhnev. Carter met with Brezhnev, and these guys had respect for each other. Like, again, this level of vilification for a Russian leader, is unprecedented, again, because even Stalin in his lifetime, I mean, Roosevelt was sitting down with him, Churchill was sitting down with him. You've never seen this type of vilification.
Or cancel, or trying to cancel a country. I mean, you're trying to cancel 1,000 years of cultural, science, technology, literature, music, every athletics that's contributed to the world. And I've never seen anything like how they're trying to cancel it and even erase history. I mean, trying to ban Dostoevsky, trying to ban Russian athletes from participating in Wimbledon, in the Boston Marathon. I mean, cats from the International Cat Show. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, no, this is racism, pure and simple. I mean, I mean, we even had the State Department claiming that Russia had no culture, right? That it was like
America does.
A gas station posing as a country. And again, what about Tolstoy, who wrote what is arguably the greatest novel of all time, War and Peace?
Right.
Dostoevsky, the great composers, right? Tchaikovsky and Prokofiev and Shostakovich. And you had Sergei Eisenstein, one of the early great filmmakers. I mean,
and the first astronaut into
of course
space.
Right.
I mean, it's amazing the contribution.
What Russia has done for the world, and it's disgusting how they are being, as you say, canceled. A whole culture, and that's why the Russian people are shocked by this, right? I mean.
Yeah.
Putin's been saying this for years. They hate us, okay? And most Russians are like, no, that's not true. That can't be true. And then all of a sudden, of course, the special operation begins and they see these things happen. Sports teams uninvited, singers uninvited to things. And they realize, oh, wow, you're right. They hate us. They hate us. It's not, they don't just hate you and the government. They hate us. They hate Russians. I mean, it's actually incredible.
I don't understand it, especially because it's clear there are neo-Nazis in Ukraine. Clear.
The U.S. has been helping and funding. And one thing I like to remind people, one piece of evidence of this is that people forget, Congressman John Conyers from Michigan, he sponsored a congressional resolution which passed Congress and was signed by Obama to stop supporting Nazis in Ukraine. Okay, so the entire Congress and the president acknowledged they were the Nazis who the US was funding. And then, of course, Congress decided, oh, I guess we need to fund Nazis. So they actually repealed that ban on funding Nazis. This is true. So, like, the United States Congress and the president of the United States acknowledged at that time, there's Nazis, we've been funding them, let's stop it. Well, then let's start it again. The point is, no one was disputing the existence of these Nazis.
And then, you know, they would almost get away with erasing the history, except that Julian Assange, who gave up his freedom to bring us the war crimes of the empire, so to speak, brought to light the Victoria Nuland and what happened in Maidan in 2014. And so when people say this military conflict started in February 24th, you know, I see a lot of Russian people, rightly so, counter it saying, oh no, this started in 2014 during a Western-backed coup in Maidan, because all they're asking for is a neutral Ukraine. You know, I've read over and over again what some of the transcripts of what Russia wanted, right? And it's not unreasonable. Like, so what is your thought about why the US can't go down this diplomatic end road? I think I know the answer, but I want to hear it from you.
Yeah, well, first of all, I agree with you. I mean, in fact, some people are couching what has happened in Ukraine as a reverse Cuban Missile Crisis, right? When the Soviet Union tried to put missiles in Cuba 90 miles off the coast of Florida, John F. Kennedy said, you know, that we would go to war over this, that was unacceptable, right? Meanwhile, you have Ukraine on the border of Russia that has these neo-Nazis that are actively target Russian speakers in Ukraine. 14,000 people died in that war, right? You have missiles now pointed at Russia from places like Poland, right? Before the special operations, Zelensky said he was considering getting nuclear weapons. So, you know, and of course, don't forget Trump, who allegedly, you know, they claimed was in the tank for Putin. He got rid of the intermediate nuclear missile treaty from 1987 that Reagan had negotiated. You know, all these things, if the shoe were on the other foot, if Russians had troops and missiles in Mexico, and they were supporting anti-US forces in Mexico who were killing Americans, English-speaking Americans in Mexico, we wouldn't tolerate that for 1 second, right? So then the question is, well, why are we foisting this on the Russians? Why are we doing this? Knowing full well how they're going to react, right? Because we react the same way. Well, there's only one logical conclusion. We wanted this. We wanted a conflict. We wanted a war in order to try to weaken and destroy Russia in much the same way that Carter and Brzezinski, right, 1979, June of 1979, started arming the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. Zelensky would later say that they did it to draw the Soviets into Afghanistan so that the Soviets would have their Vietnam. That was Zelensky's words, and bleed them dry. Most Americans to this day think the US started supporting the Mujahideen in Afghanistan after the Soviets invaded to push back the Soviets. No, we did it before they invaded to draw them into Afghanistan. And that's exactly what we've done with the Ukraine. We wanted this war. We thought it would, one, militarily bleed them. And then, of course, we had all these economic sanctions ready to go once they did it. We thought that would economically destroy them, which it hasn't. But that was the game plan all along. And clearly,
well, and I think further, it's the United States of distraction, right? I think that, you know, the Biden administration was failing as well domestically. And what gets them money for the weapons manufacturers and stimulates that portion of that economy for those elite few is the military industrial complex. And you know, you have these neocons and hawks. You have, Jake Sullivan, you have Andrew Blinken, but you have more behind the scenes people that you don't see that I know were there, that I knew from, that are still with Biden, that, basically want war.
Yeah.
And there's the reason they is because they profit from it.
Yes, exactly. They profit from it. And as you say, I think it was a political distraction. Biden has not done well with the economy. Obviously, inflation's rising, and it was starting to rise before the special operation, right?
Yes, it was.
Trying to blame it on Russia, but this was happening before. And of course, we had the COVID surge in January. Biden was tanking, and of course, his withdrawal from Afghanistan was messy and embarrassing. And so I think he decided we need something else to be happening. Now, of course, that's backfired for the moment. His approval ratings are in the toilet, right?
28% right now as we speak, which is the lowest in presidential history. I think that's lower than Donald Trump at this point.
But this scares me because it makes me wonder what he feels he needs to do to improve those numbers, whether he wants a bigger conflict. Because what's happening now ain't working, right?
Right.
And it shouldn't work, of course, because when you're sending billions of dollars to Ukraine and you can't even get baby formula to babies in your own country, people shouldn't vote for you. They should not support you. He's a failure by any measure. He's a failed president. And but what he might do out of desperation to turn those numbers around, I don't know, because I don't know what options are left for the Democrats. They have an unpopular president. They have an even more unpopular vice president. And
even more unpopular Congress. I mean, members and even the progressives.
Yeah. And it's going to be the Valentine's Day massacre.
It is
in November. The Democrats are going to be destroyed. So
well, maybe. And that's the thing is I don't like to project that too much because they tend to do things to make it happen. So I just, like, for instance, one of the things that they're going to pump money into is troll farms. Like, I know this personally because I get trolled by Democratic National Committee troll farms, like Really America, Super PAC, and Sally Albright and all them. So they've just started back up again. I can tell you, I know, and they're getting paid. And so they try to sway opinion. So the next thing I think is they're going to try to galvanize us around, unfortunately, I think a global conflict, and that's where we're heading. I mean, I see it coming, but no one's going to win, like, it will ruin generations.
Yeah.
So,
the problem we have, though, is that we have a ruling class, and this is what I've been talking about for years. I mean, because one would have to scratch their head. I used to have a friend, my buddy Hillary, not Hillary Clinton. Hillary.
I was going to say what?
My buddy Hillary Lehrman in Dayton, Ohio, used to say to me, Dan, he says, the rich, they like to go to the opera. They like to go to the symphony. They need a certain amount of peace and stability, keep people happy enough so they can do those things. That's, I don't think that's true anymore. Okay. So the ruling class has decided they're not even going to stay in this world. They're going to Mars, right? And there was no better indication of this than during the pandemic. You had these three rich guys going to space. Right. There were stories about the super wealthy with their yachts circling Manhattan to wait out the pandemic. You see stories of people with these mansion-sized yachts living in the oceans, and people are buying properties out in New Zealand. The ruling class does not walk amongst us anymore. They don't need to go to the symphony. They don't need to use our roads. They don't need to use our airplanes. They got their own airplanes and spaceships. The point is, they are willing to let us all die. And this is a new thing, right? They don't feel that their fate is tied to us in any way. And so they are willing to risk World War III. And I think that's what people underestimate. They don't understand how disconnected our rulers are from us, and how willing they are to sacrifice us just to make, bleed us as dry as they can, take it all with them and leave. I mean, that's the plan. That is their plan.
Oh God. Yeah. It's a dire plan. It's really bleak. And I have a question about that. If you were Vladimir Putin and you're facing that, how do you even, what do you do to protect your own country?
Well,
Because
that's a great question.
obviously
I think
that's not his mindset.
The Russians and the Chinese and others have been thinking about this for a long time. I mean, the US has had its way for years, certainly since the collapse of the Soviet Union. It's invaded any country it's wanted to. It's destroyed many countries. It's been able to coerce countries through economic sanctions, and a lot of countries have been wondering, like, how are we going to counter this? And a lot of countries haven't had the power up till now to do it. I think, right now what we're seeing in Ukraine is Russia's finally asserting itself to try to push back against this. And to some extent, it has done so successfully. It is weathering the economic sanctions. The ruble's now through the roof, right?
It's one of the top currencies in the world. Yeah.
Yeah. The Chinese are doing fine. And I think they're both going to do fine, barring a U.S. war against them. But I think that war could be coming. I mean, that is what I fear, that is possibly part of the plan. I think the Russians and Chinese are preparing for that. I don't know how much you could. It will be a devastating war if that comes. A lot of humanity will be destroyed. And that's why we have to pose it. That's the other thing. I mean, I think if we were to really cut to the chase, I think however people view Russia, however they view Ukraine, however they view any of this, goal number one has to be to stop a nuclear war, to stop World War III. That's our goal. Yeah. We should be able to agree on that. And we, the American people, are the only people who can stop it. Because if it starts, it's going to start from here.
Right.
And I think that is pretty clear. And then when you hear Biden, Biden's losing in Ukraine and he's threatening to attack China. I mean, these people are insane.
They are insane. Yeah. they're psychopaths. We're at a point. You had mentioned something in your book that I wanted to come back. I know it wasn't your direct quote. It was, you were quoting someone else, but it was regarding this. It was about the Reagan years when they were contemplating nuclear Holocaust, same kind of hawkish kind of deal, talks about it. And they said that there was 200,000 people were considered expendable in the US.
No. Many more.
Okay, I got that wrong. Okay.
This was in the late 60s. The Defense Department decided we could lose half our population and still be a functioning nation. Right?
Really?
Yeah, half our at that time, I don't know what the population was. I think it was maybe 200 million or maybe it was 150 million. We're talking millions of people.
Right.
They decided that they were expendable. We could lose that many and keep going. That is Dr. Strangelove. Well, in fact, Dr. Strangelove was
the film
based on some of that stuff because General Westmoreland and all that.
Right.
They were openly talking about these crazy things. And so again, people have to really, get their heads around that. That we have
that they don't care.
Yeah,
they do not care.
Those terms. Who think that millions could die, and that would be totally fine with them. Yeah.
Yeah. So as far as where we go from here, like for instance, today, right? Finland and Sweden, they're trying to join, as you know, here we go with NATO, which most people think that are, relatively peaceful people think that it should be abolished. It shouldn't be expanding the way it's expanding. However, if Finland and Sweden join, how does that change the outlook?
Well, I think it makes the world all that much more dangerous. People have to remember that Finland partnered with the Nazis in invading the Soviet Union.
Yep.
The Finnish airport just changed the symbol of their the Air Force, which had a Nazi swastika on it. They just took that off. They just did, right? To try to
clean up the image.
Clean up their act, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Finland especially, which is on the border of Russia, if they enter NATO, that will be seen again as a red line for Russia.
Well, yeah, and what for the audience that's listening, like look at your map. Finland shares, I think it's 900 or 800 miles of borderland with Russia.
Right.
That's a huge border. That's like, equivalent of almost Canada for us, right? So imagine if missiles were just pointed right at all our cities.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, the Russians won't put up with that. And again, this is being talked about even after this conflict in Ukraine began. Like, you'd think people would be trying to ratchet down the tension, right?
Right. Or
Instead, they're trying to ratchet it up. I mean, that's clearly what's happening. Like, oh, we've already provoked Russia. Let's just provoke them even further. I mean, again, this is not something you've really seen before. Again, if you think of the Cuban Missile Crisis when the shoe was on the other foot, John F. Kennedy definitely had bellicose statements and clearly was ready to go to war over this. But at the same time, he was negotiating with Khrushchev, right? There was brother Bobby, who made conciliatory moves with Russia, agreed, one, that they wouldn't invade Cuba, right? That's why the Cubans wanted the missiles. And two, that we would get our missiles out of Turkey. People forget we had missiles in Turkey at the time pointing at Russia. So at the same time, Kennedy was talking tough, he was negotiating with Khrushchev. I don't see that happening right now.
No, there's no adults in the room right now.
Right.
And if like some of the people, long timers that work with Biden, there's no adults in this room. I'm telling people, like, they need to pay attention because this is their life. They need to be involved with their country and what's happening because it's stark right now. Now, do you know,
is run by children. Actually, there's a great, it's incredible. If you go lobby, it's mostly 20 somethings. And there's actually a great movie. It's a British movie, and I'm forgetting what it's called. It's about the Iraq War, and this general comes in. I think it's British, and they make him talk to this like 20-year-old or something. It's really funny, but it's real. And apparently, for example, the sanctions that Biden imposed on Russia were not run by the Federal Reserve or our economic experts. It was these, infants who decided to do this. Again, we have to get some control over who's running this country. It's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's very, very, very frightening. Hey, Reeve, I wanted to take this time because we're at the 30-minute point of our show.
Yes, ma'am.
To see if there's any comments or questions.
We're getting a raid on Twitch from Radical Leftist Agenda, one of our friends of the show. That's nice of them. I'm trying to look. There was a couple of things with Nazis amassing at their border. What else could Russia do? Was one of the questions.
Well, I agree. What else were they to do? I mean, honestly, and I've written about this, and I, much to my, discredit with many people. I mean, I think we have to be honest. What were they to do? The other thing that they had intelligence. And there have been other intelligence agencies and folks out of intelligence from Switzerland, France, who have corroborated this. The Russians claim with some credibility that the Ukrainians, the government in Kiev was preparing a massive invasion of the Donbass region before this happened. And in fact, over the weekend before the Russian invasion, there were 2,000 ceasefire violations.
Wow.
Between Kiev and the Donbass.
2,000.
2,000. And one day there were 1,500. This is according to European EU observers in country at that time. This is not the Russians who said this. This is the EU. I forget what organization it is, but it was an EU organization of observers that were there that said this. And you can find this. I mean, this, they were, the Russians felt they were under existential threat only because they were under existential threat. And we don't even make the pretense that they weren't. We're very open that we're trying to existentially threaten you.
Right. And I think what was notable to me was a few days before the invasion, there was supposed to be a peace summit that the US and Russia were supposed to have, and the US canceled it. And this was a few days before. That was another red flag. Like I was thinking I remember that week, and I was like, something's wrong. Like they canceled the peace talk. Like they canceled it. And then, but didn't give a reason to, and so Russia was left with that knowledge. But also, do you think the biolabs had something to do with it? And now I know, Victoria Nuland had to admit there were biolabs, because at first they said this was Russian disinformation. It's not. And, the money now has been made clear, and the financing behind it, and that there actually were biolabs in Ukraine that were US funded and controlled. So do you think that also played into the special, that threat played into it?
Well, yeah, I do think that. And that's been written about for some time. There's that one, I'm forgetting her name. I'm sorry. There's a journalist who's really been focusing on that, certainly since 2018, that's been writing about these biolabs. So it's been an open secret. So she knew about it. Russian intelligence knew about it.
Webb?
Yes, I think
Whitney?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think Whitney Webb you're talking about?
No, it wasn't Whitney Webb. I want to say it was a Slavic name. I'm not remembering. I mean, Whitney might have written about it for sure, but there was this other journalist who's pretty well known who was really focusing on it.
Caitlin Johnstone wrote about it early on as well.
So there's probably a number of people.
Yeah. But it wasn't. But as far as but it was being dismissed and at first, until that very monumental hearing, when Victoria Nuland just, she admitted it. Yeah, we have them there, but we're worried about it getting into Russian hands. Oh, really?
Yeah, why are you worried about them having it?
Yeah.
I mean,
if it's not dangerous, what are you worried about?
Right.
Yeah.
And you have like people like Francis A. Boyle, who was on the founding board of Amnesty International, one of the greatest human rights lawyers in the world, out of the University of Illinois Law School. He helped write the International Convention Against Biological Weapons, and he stated publicly from what he could tell from what was being done at those biolabs, that these were bioweapons labs, that these fell under this Biological Weapons Convention. So people need to take that very seriously. What were we doing there, and to what end? And some
Well,
yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm just going to say a lot of that's going to come out,
right.
More and more documentation is going to come out. The Russians have found some of that, and they're going to make it public, and, it's going to embarrass the US even further.
I want to take a minute to talk about the media, because it's so complicit. I mean, I've seen kind of pro-war propaganda before, but nothing like what I've seen at the White House press briefings, where every single question wasn't, are there inroads to diplomacy? Are there inroads to peace? No, it was, how many weapons going to Ukraine? When? And what kind? And like amping it up. And
why aren't we sending more weapons? Right.
Yeah, exactly. But there was no voice in the room saying, wait a second. Has there been a discussion of us fighting a proxy war against Russia via Ukraine? Is that what this is? Why is the US putting $53 billion towards this? There's really no one in the room asking that in the White House press briefing anyway.
No, you're right.
What are your thoughts about that? Are they complicit in taking us to world war?
Yeah, I've never seen a press this compliant, this pro-war in my lifetime. I mean, it always has been to some extent, right? They helped lie us into the war in Iraq with the weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist. They, promoted the Gulf of Tonkin lie in the Vietnam War. They've always done that. But at the same time, next to that, you had like 60 Minutes who was covering the war in Vietnam, showing the atrocities, right? You had people like Bill Moyers on PBS covering the terrible crimes in Central America that the US was committing. You had Seymour Hersh, who won the Pulitzer Prize for, exposing the My Lai massacre, for exposing Abu Ghraib, right? But then as time goes on, I mean, those avenues of journalism start to shut down, to the extent that, once Seymour Hersh starts writing about US plans to attack Iran, for example, and the misdeeds of the US in supporting jihadists in Syria, he becomes to be totally censored, right? He was writing for the New Yorker, Seymour Hersh, and then he ended up at the London Review of Books. Then he was writing in a German paper, right?
Mhm.
So like, and now he doesn't write at all. I mean, he was totally driven out of the journalistic world.
Mhm.
And we see this more and more. You have this Scott Ritter, who was in military intelligence, who was right about the weapons of mass destruction, right?
Mhm.
That they didn't exist, who now has been kicked off Twitter, who cannot, he's not
vilified. Yeah.
he's
I mean,
not
they went
invited
after
on
him.
CNN. He's
Mhm.
not invited on Fox. He's not invited anywhere.
Mhm.
You know, it's incredible how terrible our media is. I think it may be the worst media in the world in terms of that. There's almost no oxygen for independent journalists. Is John Pilger,
No.
great, yeah.
Go ahead. John Pillager.
Pilger, great journalist out of the UK, said, what passes for journalism today now is anti-journalism. It's just
Oof,
people reading off the State Department freaking cue card at this point.
Oh yeah, literal talking points. And if you stray from those talking points, you get deplatformed, demonetized, or whatever. And then, of course, you have this whole ecosystem of independent media trying to emerge, or independent voices, or anti-war voices, or whatever you have, but they're being funded and infiltrated by corporate, and because they're trying to control and just narrow the messaging so that we have one lens that we look at through the West, and that's it. And we're not allowed any other lens. And, I think the biggest example of that was the takedown of RT. And I think it's criminal, actually, beyond just being wrong. It was criminal the way it went down, the way they've been censored, the way Great Britain, took their license from them, their broadcasting license, with no provocation. It was ridiculous. And there was, their stories. They have, first of all, great journalists, as that work for them. And Larry King worked for RT. Larry King wouldn't have worked for RT if he was controlled in any way.
Christopher Hitchens.
Yeah. Hedges, yeah, and
sorry, Hedges, not
Abby
Hitchens,
Martin,
sorry.
Abby Martin,
Hedges,
and
right.
Abby Martin, and the rest. But my point is that that's censorship, and then to be taken down, in Europe and Germany and England and so on and so forth. All it does is give us this imbalance, so that all that people are allowed to see is this through this one Western lens. And journalists are facing, investigative journalists are facing a lot of persecution. And I wanted to talk to you for a minute about one of our colleagues, your colleagues, Ava Bartlett, who is a Canadian journalist, who is in, and so let's talk about that for a minute and what that means, because you spoke to her recently.
I spoke to her this morning. Yeah, no, she's an incredible person. She's a Canadian journalist. She goes to these war zones. She's been to Gaza. She's been to Syria many times. I met her in Syria, in fact, last year. She's been to the Donbass in Ukraine a number of times, including twice so far since the special operation. And she's going there again this Thursday. And she's on a kill list, by the Ukrainian armed forces. This is a Canadian, and she also has an American passport. So, but neither the US nor Canada care about our welfare, right? In any respect. And she's vilified constantly, and she risks her life to try to show the other side of these conflicts, which is an invaluable service, risks her life doing it. And
she's won many awards. I mean, if you look her up, it's she's quite esteemed. But one of the things that struck me, this kill list isn't just like a threatening list. How many? I think I saw 2 journalists were killed. One's disappeared so far, or is that more? Do I have the numbers wrong on that?
Well, that sounds right.
That's no joke. Yeah,
no, it's a serious thing. And again, these neo-Nazis in Ukraine are serious people, right? And I have no doubt if she's on a kill list, that means something very serious, and people should be advocating for her.
Right. And, we've watched, Shireen, what just happened to her in Palestine, where she was murdered. She was assassinated. I mean, more than murdered, she was assassinated by Israeli forces. And there was just a headline. I think it was, I don't know if it was The Guardian or one of the Western papers that said, who killed Shireen? come on. Like
Right.
you had 5 journalists, eyewitnesses to what happened, and her being shot in the head under her protective gear. So you have, Shireen that just, they're basically getting away with murdering a journalist. And then of course, Julian Assange, which he
Right.
was now about to be extradited here in the US under the Espionage Act, even though he's Australian, which I still don't understand.
Yeah,
But
yeah, he's been tortured and in jail now for many years
yeah.
on bogus charges. And the goal is, they know they could never win a case against him. So they're just going to keep him in this Kafkaesque situation where they're just going to, continue his trial forever until he dies. He'll never get out.
You're not allowed to say Kafka anymore. Kafka's been canceled.
Right. Although, well, he was Czech though. He was from Prague, right?
Doesn't matter.
Yeah. But I love.
We're
Prague.
canceling everything to the east. That's
Right.
the US.
Slovak,
That's
so I
the
take
ugly American view of the world right now.
Right.
No, but what do you think? I mean, going forward, like looking at all of this, so you have one extreme. You have journalists, these incredible investigative journalists risking their freedom and their life, getting sanctioned, everything else, trying to bring the truth. And then you have the stenographers, right? The Western journalists that are they're doing their gig. They're writing the State Department, and they're having a bunch of people on from the CIA and State Department to talk about, or the CEO of like Raytheon Industries, who's a weapon manufacturer, to talk about why we have to go to war. So where do we go from here? How, as a citizen, can we fight back? Like, what is a way that we can push back on this so that we live and don't perish?
Well, I think shows like this are important for that. I mean, we have to fight to get the truth out. First of all, we have to fight to know the truth. We need to educate ourselves. That's, goal number one. And it's not easy to do, but that means looking at alternative press. It also means maybe if you have the wherewithal to go to a place like Ukraine to see for yourself what's happening. But once you know the truth, you got to put it out there in every way you can, on social media, letters to your local newspaper, to the New York Times, lobbying Congress people.
Stop blindly virtue signaling the latest thing by having the blue and yellow flag in your Twitter profile, right?
Exactly. And it's like, okay, why don't you have the Yemen flag or the Palestinian?
Exactly.
It's just mindless jumping on the bandwagon, which I find just so depressing. And
there was one other thing I wanted to bring up, and because I know you'd have some thoughts on this. One of the things I've been watching about the regime change, because I know the tactics they're using, the psychological tactics of trying to make, Putin the villain, but they're also simultaneously, as they make him out to be the super villain, almost omnipotent, right, in his ability to create evil, right? But at the same time, they're trying to weaken his image by saying he's sickly and he's about to die, and there needs to be regime change. What can you talk a little bit about that? What they keep saying he has blood cancer and like all the stuff. And
well, yeah,
it's weird. It's cognitive dissonance, sort of.
It's cognitive dissonance. And again, it's Orwellian. It's this idea where they try to convince you to hold two opposite ideas in your mind at the same time, right? Russia's a great threat to the United States, but it's being defeated, we were told early on, by this rump military in Ukraine, right? Right. Putin is this omnipotent guy who controls our politicians, interferes in our elections, but as you say, he's sick and dying, and he's unpopular, etc. The two things can't exist at the same time. But again, they're able to convince people these opposite things, and it shows. Do you think
that they were trying to infuse this kind of thinking into the Russian people? Like, in other words, trying to do another Gaddafi type of, where they made him, villainized him so badly that, but it's not working, is it? He has like the highest ratings. Putin has higher ratings than the U.S. presidents.
Oh, wait, I think it's like something like 80% or so. I mean, it's through the roof. By the way, we have to point out another fascinating thing. There's this group that every year does a thing on democracy deficit, right? On how much people in a country polled value democracy as compared to how much democracy they think they have. And did you see the number one country who had the smallest democracy deficit, meaning that their people had the greatest faith in their democracy? Was China, was number one.
There you have it.
The US was in the middle there. The American people don't even think we're democratic, don't approve of our government, right?
Right.
And yet they're still could be convinced to spend their days worrying about Vladimir Putin. I mean, when their days should be spent trying to figure out how we get a government in power that represents us and cares about us. I mean,
and deals with our infrastructure and our problems, and the fact that like we have 700,000 people that are homeless, and we have not a living minimum wage, and medical debt and so on. I think someone had just said that they canceled their medical insurance so they could pay their medical bills. I mean, this is the kind of life we're living day to day in working class in America, whereas all the the military hawks are just able to rake in that money. Because I think their profits have gone up something like 600%. I read at one point in the first 3 months.
They're doing great. The oil companies are doing great, right?
Mm-hmm.
The rise in gas prices are because of profiteering by the oil companies. Though we're told we should be patient and whatnot. Right. You're lucky you're not in a bunker in Ukraine, we're being told. I mean, right? It's not an either or, right? People get rich on this. I mean, that's
right. Yeah. And they remember when they tried to call it Putin's gas hike or something, it didn't fly. Like, nobody's buying their bullshit. Like, and people are just like done. Like,
that's what's happening. You see that Biden's numbers keep going down. They went down after he approved the $40 billion to Ukraine. At the very same time, the baby formula crisis hit. People are starting to say, well, time out. What is going on? I can only buy so many. I can only clothe my children in so many Ukrainian flags. At some point, I got to get them some real clothes, get them some real food.
And somebody was posting all the baby formula going to Ukraine, and it's like, oh, okay, I see.
Right.
and then what did he made a speech that was so remarkable. He said, when he was justifying that money, he also said, well, Ukrainians need some pocket money. And I was just like, why isn't one member of the press asking him, wait, what? Ukrainians need pocket money?
Yeah, it's they step over homeless people in Washington. No, seriously. I mean, it's just
unbelievable.
It's unbelievable what's happening. It is.
Yeah. All right. So you have a lot going on with your world. Tell me what's going on next for books and things like that, or what you want people to know about.
Well, thank you, first of all, and thank you for having me on the show. I am writing a book on Nicaragua right now, and the Sanities of the Revolution, which is near and dear to my heart.
Yeah.
And I will tell your audience, I wasn't sure I was going to make it public, but I am on my way in 2 weeks to Russia and Ukraine. I am going to do that. I feel it is important to go there and see what's happening there.
Okay.
And I'm gonna, and I hope to come back on your show at that time and talk.
Yeah. I'd like to, if you're willing, I'd love to do some live updates, and I'd love to have you back on and hear what's going on. And make sure Ava stays safe, please.
Absolutely.
and other people, and you stay safe.
Absolutely. My older son Joe may be watching. If he is, I want to say hi to him. He's a good guy. And I want to thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're going to come on again. And I really, your book, amazing. I was telling you before we came on, I'm your fangirl. I'm reading your stuff now. I'm going to get the rest of the books, and you are prolific writing, and it's wonderful. So thank you for what you're doing, bringing awareness. We need balance. We need another voice, not just this kind of, one tiered look at what's going on. So on our way out, how can people find you? On social media?
I'm on Twitter at Daniel M. Kovalik, and Kovalik. You can find my books at skyhorsepublishing.com. I think those are two good places to start to find my stuff.
All right. So thank you everyone for listening. And thank you, Dan. It was amazing to have you. And thanks for tuning in. And there you have it. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye. You're welcome. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.